And also please check out my Instagram because on my Instagram, I'm just trying to see. Yeah. I'm trying to get Dr. Eamon in right now. Hi, Dr. Eamon. How are you?
Hello, Dr. Naidu. How are you, my
It's
friend?
I am well. It's so good to see you. Congratulations on your amazing new book, which is doing so well. I love it. And I'm hoping that, I'm going to, as usual, pummel you with lots of questions so you can help educate us. So congratulations and thank you for being here. I appreciate you taking the time. For the audience who may not know as much of your work, can you break down the book for us in terms of the concepts behind it and why you felt that you wanted to share it? Because I do think it has so many compelling messages.
So for people who don't know, I'm a psychiatrist and I look at people's brains all day long. And I've been thinking about how to optimize the brain for 30 years. And I got this idea that your brain is always listening to what's
Mm.
going on around you. And if you're not careful,
Yeah,
thoughtful about the influences, they could steal your mind.
right,
And I use the analogy of dragons
right. I love that.
uh, because J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, said it's not a story worth telling if
Mm.
there are no dragons. And so I break the book down into the dragons from the past, which I actually stole from one of my friends, Sharon May, who's a relationship counselor. And she was on our podcast and she talked about that. And I'm just like, that's so interesting.
Right.
And as I worked with my own patients, I came up with 13 dragons from the past that are always breathing fire on our emotional brain.
Yeah.
So the anxious dragon, the
Mm.
wounded dragon, the
Mm.
hopeless and helpless dragon. The most common one is the responsible dragon, where you
Mm.
feel responsible for other
Right.
people, which
That's
can
good.
create codependent
Right.
behavior if you're not careful. The grief and loss dragon, the death dragon, so common during the pandemic.
Right.
So the first part of the book is about the dragons from the past, and I talk about their origin story, where they come from, how they get
Right.
triggered, how they
Right.
cause us to react, and how to tame them.
Right.
It's actually a
That's
very fun part of the book on what movies each of the dragons
right.
like.
And there's one event I saw you on when you had a dragon with you.
I
It
do. I have
is it.
him here.
Love it.
This is the
And there's like
ancestral dragon.
yes, and there's like one on the book as well, so that people know.
They're very important.
Right.
Part two is about the they, them, and other dragons. It's the influence of people alive and dead
Mm.
on your brain. Like my brain still listens to my grandfather, who I was named after, who was my
Mm.
best friend when
Oh.
I was growing up.
Oh.
It still listens to my dad, who was harsher and not quite so nice until later in his life. Um, it listens to the mean kids in school,
Right. Right.
right, who were
Right.
critical of us.
Yeah.
It listens
Mm-hmm.
to the faceless they dragons, right?
Yeah.
My mother
Mm-hmm.
used to say, well, they won't like that. And I always
Yes.
went, well, who are
Right.
they?
Who are they? Right.
The internet troll dragons
Yes.
with your book. I don't know if you got any of them.
We all do.
You,
I'm told this is what I was told, Dr. Amen. I was told that your book must be doing well if that happens. So I don't know. It's not
if
it's
you
not it's
have
not it's not
haters.
pretty. It's not pretty, but it happens to all of us.
Yeah, and it's how to deal with them. And then I talk about the bad habit dragons.
Mm.
Because once you allow your brain to do something,
Yeah.
say you always have to have dessert,
Hmm.
you're going to keep doing it.
Right.
whether it's good for you or not, because your brain is in this
Right.
habitual loop
Right. Right.
that is not good for you, perhaps.
Well, I'm really glad you touched on that because I'm asking, I've been asked all the time about, well, can't we have a treat or can't we cheat and do this? And I understand where that mentality comes from. I really do. I know it's hard for all of us. I know it's hard to not want to eat the tub of ice cream in the freezer. But what I've been talking about in relation to nutritional psychiatry has been, the foods that we call comfort foods are discomfort for the brain. And the sooner we realize it, but it really talks to this habit that you're speaking to as well, that it's really about making that change internally and understanding. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you had a very good point there.
Well, you'll love the overeater bad habit dragon and the oblivious bad habit dragon,
Right.
where you're not reading food labels.
Yeah.
You have no idea the number of calories you put into your body.
Right.
And you're basically oblivious,
Yeah.
and you put down or demean people who are serious about their health.
About the health. Yeah.
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 I was at the White
Everyone
House.
has. Yeah. Yeah.
I was at the White House, and I remember Kellyanne Conway. She's like, oh, all these parents, they worry about gluten-free and dairy-free. Just let them eat anything they want. And I just shook my head, like, really? That we shouldn't care about the quality of the
Oh
food
my
we
God.
put in our body, because the
Right.
quality of food you put in your body
Right.
relates to the quality of the health of your brain that
Mm-hmm.
makes every decision you make.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I read this statistic yesterday that just horrified me.
Mm-hmm.
6 out of 10 people during the pandemic had significant weight changes.
6 out of 10. That's
40%
impressive. Yeah.
had increases.
Wow.
40%.
Wow.
And in some age groups, the average increase was 40 pounds, especially
Wow.
affecting younger people.
People.
Now, there were also
Wow.
significant decreases
Right.
in weight because of the stress. Some people eat when they're
And
stressed.
some
Some
people
people
stop eating. Don't.
stop eating
Right. Right.
when they stress.
Absolutely.
There's a brand new 12-step program in the
Hmm.
book. And because at Amen clinics, I have 9 clinics around the country, we
Someone's asking
treat,
about the name of the book, so I just want to make sure that they have it.
your brain is
Just
always listening.
listening.
So we treat a lot of addiction at Amen clinics.
Yeah.
And the 12-step program, and I'm a fan of 12-step programs.
Yeah.
I've sent many people to them.
Mm-hmm.
But quite frankly, the 12 steps were developed 85 years ago.
Yeah.
And there's no neuroscience in any of
Mm.
the steps. And
Right.
it's become like a religion, and people like, no, you can't mess with the steps. And I'm
Right.
like, well, what
Right.
if we could
People are
make
very
them
attached
better?
to that. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, well, what if we
Right.
could make them better?
Better. Yeah.
Like step 1 in the traditional 12-step program is know when your life is out of control. Well, a neuroscientist would say, well, that's step 2. Step 1 is
Mm.
activate your frontal lobes and ask yourself, what do you want?
Mm.
What do you want in your relationships,
Right.
your work, your money, your physical, emotional, spiritual health? What do you want? And step 2 is, well, is your behavior getting you what you
Right.
want? And if it's not, and you can't stop,
Mm-hmm.
well, then you need to activate the program.
Mm.
And step 3 is got to get your brain right.
Right.
Because if your brain's not healthy, you won't make good decisions, and you won't be able to stop
Right.
doing the things that hurt you. And then there's the step on the neuroscience of craving control. And I love this idea of dripping dopamine, don't dump it. Because too often
Tell us
people,
more about that.
you think
I
of
do love that.
the ice cream sundae,
Right.
that's
Right.
dumping dopamine, or cocaine, or marijuana, or alcohol,
Anyone says,
or having an illicit affair, or gambling. Those are all things that dump dopamine,
Yeah.
and you won't have anything left. And so after
Right.
you engage in the behavior that makes you feel euphoric, you then feel depressed. You
Yeah.
feel
The
flat.
long the long-term effect is depression, and often severe changes to your brain, which people don't realize, which is why sometimes those comfort foods, or we know that sugar and dopamine work in the same circuits. But what I do love about your work, Dr. Aamon, I'm going to say your name again because people are asking. It's Dr. Daniel Aamon, and he has a new book called Your Brain is Always Listening, and it's amazing. And you should check it out because what he's speaking to us about is these different dragons. Really, you name them dragons, which I think is really cool, and bring sort of a playful element in to teach us something really important that's based in neuroscience. So one of the things I wanted to tap into, given your expertise, is the brain imaging stuff. Can you walk us through, I always love that. Can you walk us through some of the things that, given this weight, let's say for the majority of people, I would say have probably gained weight in the pandemic, how can how can we walk ourselves back from some of those habits when you think about brain imaging and what that tells us about, those sugary treats or the processed food sales that were up at the beginning of the pandemic, hugely increased, and have been higher during the pandemic. Are there things that we can understand from the brain imaging studies to help us out there? Because I was just saying before you came on, one of the things that psychiatry is notorious for, and I'm not that much of a fan of DSM-5, is because it doesn't capture all people, and our diagnostic tools are limited.
The DSM will tell you what it is. It won't tell you why it is. And that's the problem, because depression isn't one thing, or ADD is not one thing, or addictions are not one thing.
And there are many people who fall into categories that are sort of in between the other larger categories, I often see. So
right.
I agree with that.
And so overeaters are not one thing. And my work has shown that we have impulsive overeaters, people who can't say no. We have compulsive overeaters, people who can't stop thinking about it. There's sad overeaters, there's anxious overeaters. And knowing your brain type is critical to managing your weight and your behavior. And so, for example, if you're an impulsive person and you're under a lot of stress, it actually drops your frontal lobes, and it's harder for you to make a good decision. If you're compulsive, well, chronic stress drops serotonin availability in the brain, and you worry, you hold on to negative thoughts, you spin on the stress you feel, and sugar increases serotonin in the brain in the short run, but makes you sick in the long run, makes you more depressed in the long run. And so the alternative, so people can know their brain type. I have a quiz online, brainhealthassessment.com. It'll tell you what your brain type is. And then based on it, these are the supplements that help, or these are the exercises. So, and the universal treatment for all of them is exercise. Head to head against Zoloft, exercise was found to be equally effective. Exercise increases dopamine, it increases serotonin, it ultimately will calm you if you're anxious, and has antidepressant qualities to it. And this is why Zoom has been so hard on us, because people are glued to their computers. And almost all of my Zoom meetings, I'm not on video, I'm walking. So I get 10,000 steps a day just for meetings.
That's super smart.
Most people know what I look like, right? And what people don't know
that's very smart.
is when you exercise, 10 minutes into it, because of the serotonin bump to your brain, you're actually more flexible, which means you'll solve problems better. And so I love your book. I think that's the way to eat. It's the way I've been talking about for a long time.
I'm gonna show up and show it up because I have you online with me. I'll show people, but thank you. And then I'm going to show your amazing book, Love the Dragons.
And
And thank you. But you know, to your point, and I appreciate the praise of my book, but to your point, the people have that good feeling when they eat like a sugary donut, and that's one of the things I've written about. Or you know, something that ice cream, whatever it is that gives them that feeling. They do feel that immediate sort of. They kind of look at me like you're crazy because I feel good when I eat it, but they don't realize the long-term effects, and that's where the brain, you know, the brain science just really becomes so important to understand.
And even the short-term effects, because most people who eat the donut or eat the bowl of ice cream or two, I mean, that was always the trap for me. Halfway
Yeah.
through the first bowl, I'm
Oh
thinking
yeah.
about the
Yeah.
second bowl.
I used to bake a lot.
Is
Yeah.
is a half an hour later you don't feel well,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't like yourself.
Right.
So it's a very short-term benefit
Right.
for a very long-term
Term.
problem.
Right.
And I
Especially in your brain.
published, well, you and I know because we're working on a paper together.
We're working on our paper. Yeah.
I published a study on 35,000 scans showing as your weight went up, the function of your brain went down virtually everywhere.
Mm.
And it's horrifying. And we're working on the study with kids and teenagers, and it shows virtually the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's frightening when you think of 72% of us are overweight,
Right.
42% of Americans are obese, and obesity is a risk factor for 30 medical illnesses, including
Right.
heart disease, hypertension, and cancer.
Right. And including COVID, where it's these predisposing factors have actually made for worse outcomes and worse outcomes in mental illness, the especially individuals with long COVID. And then the other fact that I was reading about recently is 88% of Americans have at least one abnormal value in their metabolic panel. So metabolic disease is on the rise. And I think that when we're looking at all of this and we realize we're in a pandemic, you know, what do we do to walk ourselves back? And that's why I think the tools that you offer us in your book by identifying those dragons, and then whichever dragons exist in my life may be different from what exists in someone else's life, and then understanding them and using the program is I think amazing. But tell us more about the 12 steps and how give us a taste of how people could use that in your book. Because I personally think a lot of that also applies to eating as well. I can't hear you. Dr. Eamon, I can't hear you.
That
Okay.
is, oh, can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Um,
Great.
so, so one is know what you want, and two is know when you're out of control, and three, get your brain right. Four is
Mm-hmm.
really interesting because it's about forgiveness, and based on our
Mm-hmm.
brain imaging work, its behavior's way more complicated
Yeah.
than most people think. Um, I am going to have to plug my phone in. Hang on one
Okay.
second.
Sure.
I'm running out of juice.
Just this happens. So for people who are asking,
There
I
we go.
don't actually, I'm not smart enough to figure out how to show the book in the correct frame to get it so that you can read it. But it's called Your Brain is Always Listening. So, and while we're there, Dr. Amen, can you tell us your website where they can find the book or where you'd like people to purchase it from?
So if they go to yourbrainisAlwaysListening.com, they can actually get some special bonuses
Okay,
with the book as well. And they can
great.
get it at Amazon or Barnes and Noble or
Yeah,
anywhere great books are sold. Um,
thank you. So I'm sorry, you were saying, and I was asking about 12 steps.
well, and then five is know your brain type. And six is what's the neuroscience of craving. If you don't sleep, you're more likely to relapse.
Yeah.
And in the relapse community, in the addiction community, they talk about this acronym HALT. Don't
Mm,
get too hungry. Low
mm-hmm,
blood sugar is
mm-hmm,
actually associated with relapse. Don't get too angry. Negative
Right.
thoughts drop frontal lobe function.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get too lonely, which
Mm-hmm.
clearly happened during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And
That
don't
was a
get too
huge issue. Yeah.
and don't get too tired. And
Mm-hmm.
so work to eat right, to get your thoughts right, to stay connected. They made a mistake at the beginning of the pandemic and they called it social distancing. Bad
Mm.
term. It's
Yeah.
physical distancing.
It's
I
physical
need to be
distancing.
separated from you so
Yeah.
the virus doesn't jump from me to
Right.
you.
It's
But
physical
I need to be
distancing.
more
It's social.
connected.
Yeah. I need to be more social. I couldn't agree with you more. You know, it's unfortunate that they didn't switch that early because it really should have been called physical distancing. Because socialization, whether it was Zoom or FaceTime or however you could get online, was just so important for everyone, even if you were not on your own. So I completely agree with that as well. So I know that the imaging studies, and you have data about obesity in children. Can you talk about that a little bit? And I'll tell you why I'm asking. I came across some scary statistics recently where we know that younger people, teenagers, have had an uptick of suicide during the pandemic, and I know that it's related to what we just spoke about, the isolation, the loneliness, not being with their peers, many things, many different things. But what's your take on that, just from your imaging work and just your research?
Self-harm behavior went up 400% in teenagers during the pandemic. I mean, it's very frightening. And, uh, it's a two-sided issue. In the one hand, families have more time together than they've ever had
Yeah.
because we've had two-parent working families for three
Mm-hmm.
generations, which means we've had chronically stressed families.
Right.
And now, like in my house, I mean, we have hour-long dinners regularly, where
Mm-hmm.
before the pandemic, it was sort of rare that people were home
We're
during dinner
almost
time.
sat down together. Yeah.
And so that part's good. But the part that's bad is kids in their room all day long on Zoom bred depression, where they
Mm.
weren't outside, they weren't getting the physical activity, they weren't
Yeah.
interacting with their peers, and the loneliness and isolation. Um, and the lack of vitamin D
Yeah.
and the bad food because they went after comfort foods,
Right.
and the parents feeling bad for the children
Right.
didn't supervise them as they
Mm.
normally might
Everyone was
have.
stressed. Exactly. Everyone
And
was stressed. Yeah.
yeah, but there's a whole other group who, because they were stressed, they got healthy. And
That's right.
that's, you know,
There've
it's,
also been this other group of individuals who've thrived really, and who have taken up different forms of exercise, changed their eating habits, reset themselves in a way. So, they're actually people we should look to for the kind of role models that they're also creating in our society. It's not been the same sort of response that everyone has had, even though they've been fewer.
so it's TLC is the acronym if you want to be resilient during a tough time, is you
Hmm.
have to see it as temporary.
Hmm.
Local, yes, I know it's a global pandemic, but how does it
Hmm.
affect your neighborhood?
Hmm.
And control. I must have prayed the serenity prayer like thousands of times.
Yeah.
God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change,
Hmm.
the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the
The
difference. I
difference.
mean, that's
Yeah.
mental health.
Mm. Hmm.
And I'm actually friends with Ariana Grande. And I
Hmm.
texted her the other day and I said, your song, Thank You Next, is mental health in 3 words. Now, a lot of people don't think of it because it's like all of the relationships and stuff that she's had. But basically, Thank You Next is about gratitude for what has happened to you and
Yeah.
then looking forward.
Right. Absolutely.
Gratitude, looking forward. Again, that's like TLC, it's mental health. No
Yeah.
matter
I love
what's
that.
happened, can I learn from it, be stronger, and move to the future?
Hmm. Couldn't agree more. And I think that that's some of what I try to remind people of when I'm working with them around these unfortunate habits we've picked up during the pandemic. And it's really resetting ourselves, because it's time that it's a year later now. We've got to adjust. It's not going to go back to anything that we knew before, and we have to make the adjustment, mind, body, and spirit. And as your book speaks to, the brain is always listening. I think that it's really identifying those dragons. And I love I love the mug.
My
I have to go.
dragon mug.
Dragon mug. Everyone should get the book and get the mug. So I was just thinking that those are the things that I think are hard. While I feel empathy for people, including myself and all of us involved, we sort of have to find our way out the other side now that it's a year later. And I think that books like yours and identifying those emotions, that we can then almost repair aspects of our history, of what we have struggled with, of the voices that exist in our head that we listen to. And by that I mean, relationships from our past, positive or not so positive. Like you referenced members of your family, we all have those in our lives.
So there's
I
an
love the
interesting
message.
question.
Yeah.
What other supplements can be taken to ease anxiety? I
Mm-hmm.
had an adverse reaction to GABA.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole bunch.
Mm-hmm.
Ashwagandha
Mm-hmm.
is a wonderful supplement to help with
With
anxiety and
anxiety.
sleep.
Mm-hmm. Magnesium.
Magnesium is wonderful. Theanine from
Mm-hmm.
green tea
Tea. Mm-hmm.
is amazing. So there's always options. My favorite supplement is saffron
Yes,
because
and
it's
you're
it's
you're 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 making excellent saffron supplement.
I
I
do happy
recommend it to people all the
saffron
time. Yeah,
with
most people don't realize that it helps depression.
21 randomized controlled trials showing it was as effective as Prozac and Paxil and Zoloft, Effexor, and
Hmm.
Mipramine. But without the sexual side effects. I
Yeah.
mean, we've been psychiatrists for a long time, and
Hmm.
there's sexual side effects with SSRIs that
But very
mess up
devastating.
people's lives.
Yeah.
And that's a bad thing. And it also helps with memory and shown that it helps with some of your metabolic numbers. Uh,
Absolutely.
so, well, why wouldn't I start there? And if it didn't work, then think of an antidepressant.
Right.
Um,
I know. I love that supplement, and I recommend it all the time, because we don't, when I talk about food in my book in nutritional psychiatry, but I've shared all of those studies on saffron. But I always say to people, it's one of those things where I think supplement first, because you're just not going to eat enough of a few threads of saffron in your food to get the benefit. And the studies obviously used much higher amounts. And it's called Happy
right.
Saffron, you said,
Happy saffron. And
right?
it also has curcumin and zinc
And
in
zinc.
it because
Wonderful.
both of them have studies showing it's helpful for mood. And it's something I
Amazing.
take every day because, and I tend not to be depressed, but
Hmm.
this is a vulnerable time with the
It's a
chronic stress, the negative news, the
Yeah,
uncertainty
it's
about
difficult
the
for
future.
everyone. Yeah. And thank you for saying that, because I think it's hard for people to feel vulnerable and to say that. I think there's just this ongoing stigma of mental illness that is people are struggling with. But I want to wrap up over a few things. Someone was asking how much is saffron. I'm sure that the supplement comes with directions. So it's called Happy Saffron, and it's available
Right.
at your site. Um,
BrainMD.com.
brainmd.com. Your book is available at Your Brain is Always Listening, and you can get lots of goodies and extra bonuses when you sign up for it. It's just so you and I have to get working on the paper again. We've got to pick up where we left off. But it's always a pleasure, Dr. Eamon. I always feel like I learned 1,000 things from you. So anytime I can talk to you, I hop on the phone. And I don't keep you walking when you talk to me. It's good.
Uma, so nice to see you and give your husband my love. And
I
I
will.
look forward to talking to you soon. And I
I,
follow your book, and it's doing great. And, books are a long-term thing, right? The publishers are
Thank
always
you.
like, the first couple of weeks are so important, and they are. But my biggest book, Change Your Brain,
Hmm.
Change Your Life,
Yes,
was a
one of my
bestseller
favorites.
for 1 week. And then 9 years later, it became a 40-week bestseller.
Oh,
So you
you
just
give me hope,
gotta,
Dr. Amen. Thank you.
just gotta
No, that's
push.
actually my that is actually one of my favorites, and I keep it and read it all the time. So thank you for saying that, and just thank you for being just so encouraging around the whole process and being someone I can learn from all the time and learn with. So we'll talk soon. We'll get back
Talk
on
soon.
board with the paper. Take care.
Bye,
Bye bye.
everybody.